Please briefly summarize your professional background and your roles in your firm's construction and design practice group and development and infrastructure industry group. And what do those groups do?
Sure. For almost 29 years now, I've focused my practice almost exclusively on construction law and engineering law as well. My current title at the Dorsey and Whitney law firm is chair of the firm's construction and design practice group. And I also co-chair the firm's design and infrastructure industry group. The firm's construction and design practice group works with clients in all spaces in the construction industry, from initial project development and financing to project closeout and resolving claims that nonetheless, despite everyone's best efforts and good efforts, most large construction projects end up with some claims at the end that have to be sorted out and hopefully resolved.
You said that the future is robust for the burgeoning offshore wind farm industry in the United States. What do you mean by that, and why now as opposed to earlier?
Well, I firmly do believe that the future is robust for offshore wind in the United States because the appetite is there to develop and build these large-scale wind farms. The reason for this is that we need to provide sustainable energy that meets the various states' mandates, for example, California, for clean energy, and the country's increased need for electricity in general as we transition more into electric cars in particular. It would have been nice if the US had jumped on the offshore wind bandwagon earlier, like our European friends. But given the fact that we did not, and now the Biden administration has opened the regulatory doors for offshore wind, particularly the Vineyard project off of Massachusetts, the time is ripe. And if we want to look at the time lag that has occurred here, we can look at it, with a glass half full, in the sense that the time lag has allowed us to develop technology, us being the offshore wind market and industry as a whole. Technology has continued to progress, which in turn has driven down the cost of electricity generated by these farms, making it more attractive from a competitive industry standpoint. It's just a very exciting time. I mean, with Vineyard, getting a green light, an essential green light, and there's still some hoops to get through with respect to Vineyard, but all of the projects on the East Coast that are in the works and in development have a boost in their arm as a result of the Biden administration's approval about a week and a half ago.
So how can coastal areas meet the ambitious wind energy goals that they're now setting for as early as 2030?
To be succinct about it, build and build quickly. 2030 is going to, be here before we know it. It looks on paper, it's 9 years away, but given what's happened under the previous administration with the administrative regulatory hoops, and there's still concerns. I mean, there are groups who want to have regulatory bodies continue to take a closer look at these projects, but in order to meet the mandates, we need to start building, and we need to start building quickly.
Do you think that some of those goals are realistic and will be achieved?
Well, I do think some of the goals are realistic. Some of them are aspirational. It's to our benefit as a country, and particularly with respect to reaching our sustainable energy goals, that we do achieve these goals, or at least most of them. So, people are motivated, and when we have a motivated group of talented people, wonderful things can happen. Will we achieve all of the goals? Probably not, but the push is there to achieve as much of the realistic goals that have been set as possible.
What are some of the non-financial objections to coastal wind energy, and are those still potential roadblocks?
Well, the environmental concerns are still there, and they exist. The environmental concerns with respect to birds and the fishing people, and those concerns are, legitimate concerns, and they have to be addressed, and dealt with in a collaborative way to make sure that people understand that offshore wind farms can cohabitate successfully with birds and with the fishing industry.
How can energy and structural engineers help bring about this increase in wind energy?
It's an exciting time to be a creative engineer who's interested in offshore wind. These engineers continue to need to wear their problem-solving hats. They need to design and build offshore wind farms that can withstand 200-mile-an-hour hurricane winds. Those aren't the types of winds that the projects off, the coasts of Europe are exposed to, but here in the United States, especially on the East Coast, that will be something that has to be addressed. The engineers need to design and manufacture wind turbines that last longer than 20 years. They need to design and install jackets that can withstand seismic and ice activity, especially in the Great Lakes. The engineers need to design and install wind turbines that work in deeper waters. They need to design and manufacture wind turbines that are more efficient to drive down the price of electricity and make these farms more profitable for private investment. And the list can continue, but as you can see, it's a long list, and it's a list that's being worked on and chipped away. And I have no doubt that technology will continue to drive the wind industry, and a lot of the items on the to-do list will be conquered in the next few years here.
Okay, let's see if I have this straight. You can correct me. Wind turbines on the East Coast are going to be anchored into the ground because it's shallower, but they can't do that on the Pacific Coast because the waters are too deep. And what about the Great Lakes? How do they fit in? Do they need to have floating turbines like the Pacific Coast?
The Great Lakes don't have the same conditions that exists off the West Coast in terms of the Pacific Ocean, and particularly the seismic energy. But the Great Lakes present a unique problem that needs to be addressed, which is lakes like Ontario and particularly Superior have to deal with ice cover in the winter times. So the state of New York is studying whether floating turbines are feasible as opposed to anchoring these turbines on the lake floor. And as you pointed out, that's the current design. And that's the current design of the jackets that are part of the wind farms that are in development on the Great Lake chains. But installing these floating turbines makes these projects more attractive because it's less expensive than anchoring the turbine jackets to the lake floors. And I was about to say sea floors, but lake floors here. And again, it's trying to deal with the shifting ice sheets during the winter months so that they don't destroy these jackets in the turbines. So that's something that's in the works right now, and it'll be interesting to see what the state of New York's study comes back with in terms of conclusions and recommendations.
Okay, here's a quote that I read from you, and you can maybe explain a little bit. Why do you expect to see a flurry of construction activity along the U.S. coasts and a significant long-term boon to the economy?
It goes back to the Biden administration's decision about 10 days ago to open the gates with respect to the Vineyard Project. And there's roughly off the top of my head, 30 other projects in the works right now down the East Coast. And that's just going to be exciting. And these are, large offshore wind farms that will generate a lot of power, number one, but number two, a lot of jobs, and both onshore and offshore. And so with the Biden administration's commitment to sustainable energy, the recent approval with respect to the vineyard that had been held up under the previous administration, you're going to see all systems go. You've got the governor of New York, you've got the governor of New Jersey. I can keep going on. The governor of Massachusetts. They're all behind offshore wind farms in terms of their development and construction. So hopefully, if things continue in the direction that began approximately 10 days ago, you're going to see this flurry of activity down the East Coast with respect to these projects. And that, to me anyway, that's super exciting, and it's good for the economy, and it's good for the wind farm industry in terms of offshore. And I just want to point out, there's still plenty of activity on the onshore wind industry, and that will continue. It's still cheaper to build the onshore wind farms, but that takes a lot of land. And when we look at the East Coast, particularly in places like New York and New Jersey, where it's heavily populated, the land isn't there to build these types of wind farms. So offshore becomes even more attractive. The entities that have the most experience with offshore wind in terms of the people who are putting in the dollars and trying to build the infrastructure in the United States, that's all coming from Europe. And at some point, the United States and our capital markets folks and our the GEs of the world and everything, they will start to drive this, and that's going to be important. I mean, the U.S. companies need to own offshore wind in the United States.